Hey, and thanks so much for tuning back into another segment here on Gems Podcast. With me in the hot seat is Josh Womack. And here's a bit about Josh, y'all. So, Josh Womack is a senior copywriter in Northeast Ohio. His background ranging from stand up comedy to speech writing to, yes, a very brief stint in professional wrestling has led him to this moment. His new book, I'm Not a Copywriter, but Lessons Learned from a Late Bloomer, draws on his experiences in each facet and how today he's a better copywriter for it. So, today, Josh and I are going to spend some time talking about copywriting and creative writing. So, without further ado, please welcome Josh Womack to Gems Podcast.
Hey, Genesis, how are you? It's great to be with you.
I am doing well, and thank you so much, Josh, for coming in and sharing your expertise and knowledge with the community.
Oh, I'm happy to. I'm happy to anytime, there's a chance to talk about writing or creative writing or copywriting. I'm always down to have a great conversation.
So, before we jump into the segment on copywriting and creative writing, I definitely want to get to connect on a personal level so the audience gets to know you a little bit better as well. So, there's two options. We could break the ice, or we could play a rapid fire 10 question game. Which would you like?
Wow. I'll tell you what, let's go rapid fire.
Woo, okay, these are quick questions. So, here we go. Number one, dream car.
Ford F-150.
Number two, if you could have any superpower in the world, what would it be?
Mind reading.
Number three, what charity are you donating to if you won the lottery?
That would be the city mission here in Cleveland, Ohio.
Four, dream vacation.
Ireland.
Five, craziest thing you've ever done in your life.
I'm going to go back to the intro that you had there, and I'll say the brief stint in pro wrestling.
Six, if you could recreate any significant moment in your life, what would it be?
I would say the weekend that I met my wife.
Awesome. Okay, so follow-up question. So seven, why would you create that? Recreate it.
Well, it was a moment that happened so quickly, but it's one of those moments that you like to hang on to and just kind of experience one more time. But now as I say that out loud, maybe it's the memory that makes it, so sweet. So maybe now that I talk through it, maybe I don't want to recreate it. Maybe I should just leave it where it is.
Eight, favorite food.
Lasagna.
Nine, what is your favorite movie, quote, or book?
Wow. I'm gonna go with book, and I'm gonna say The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And really that book was really what inspired me to kind of take the chance and to write a book of my own.
Amazing. And 10, our pass or play question. If you play, I ask one last question. If you pass, our roles get reversed and I ask you one question. Oh, no, and you get to ask me one question. So do you want to pass or play?
So if I pass, I get to ask you a question?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question then.
Okay, what's your question?
All right, my question is, did you say you were pregnant?
Yeah.
Okay. What in your mind is the scariest part about motherhood or upcoming motherhood?
I guess the labor and delivery, because every woman's experience is different. So some people have amazing stories and other people have not so amazing stories. So I'm just a optimist. So I'm going to have a quick, safe, and fast delivery.
I love it. The reason why I asked that is my wife is a doula.
Oh.
So she works a lot with expecting mothers, a lot of like postpartum things like that. So it's just always interesting to hear that.
Super cool. Yes. I respect doulas. I know some of them can be very pricey and not all insurances cover them. So I've been like on the teeter-totter fence if I want to get a doula or not. But my husband keeps saying, we're gonna have a fast and easy delivery. So I don't think you're gonna need one.
There you go. I like his confidence.
Amazing. And thank you so much for playing rapid fire with Genesis. So let's jump into our segment, copywriting and creative writing. And this is right up my alley. I don't know much about copywriting, so I'll be in for a treat, but creative writing, that is definitely my jam and my beat. So let's paint us a picture of what led you down this path, Josh.
Sure. I would say, one of the things I did in many, many moons ago in my previous life was I did stand-up comedy for about 7 or 8 years. And I'm not going to say I was a very good stand-up comedian, but I did learn how to write creatively. And I learned how to write jokes, how to write setups to jokes, how to, craft kind of short stories. And I always say that stand-up is much like short stories with surprise endings. So that kind of gave me the basis of just creative writing in general. And then after stand up, I did a lot of speech writing. And that got me doing creative writing for other people, not just myself. So it was about capturing other people's voice and their tone and their ability to tell a story. And then speech writing just kind of serendipitously landed me into copywriting. And I've been doing that for about 7 years now. And I always describe copywriting as kind of like creative writing with guardrails, if that makes sense. So what's nice about it is, it's kind of like focused creative writing. Um, there's a great quote from a book called "Hey Whipple, Squeeze This," which is sort of like the copywriting Bible, so to speak. And it says that copywriting or advertising isn't Wall Street, but it's not Sesame Street. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, and that's always what I come back to.
Oh, nice. I've never heard it's like with guardrails and then the not Wall Street, but not Sesame Street. Those are polar opposites. So then it's like the sweet spot in a sense. So for like, let's talk about those who self-publish, because I feel like people who are going down the self-publishing route versus the publishing house route, sometimes they may feel a little afraid about the copywriting infringements, and etc. So can you give maybe 5 tips to help them overcome that, or where they could go look for resources to really be competent? Because sometimes copywriting can be very tricky and you definitely don't want to get yourself in a legal wormhole.
Sure, sure. So the copywriting that I do, and don't feel bad because this misconception happens all the time, but the copywriting that I do is more for advertising writing. So the copywriting, and believe me, when I first started this job, everyone asked me the same question. They're like, so you write all that little language with the little C, with the circle around it, And I said, not quite. So a lot of the writing that I do is for emails, direct mail, social media, stuff like that. So it's kind of like writing for advertising, if that makes sense. So I would say, in terms of tips for copywriting, the one that I do, it's great if you're a creative person, to begin with. If you're a fan of advertising, if you like watching the Super Bowl and watching the commercials in the Super Bowl and maybe not so much the game, then you're probably a fan of copywriting. But it's been a super rewarding career. And yeah, I don't know, it is kind of that sweet spot. Like I said, not quite Wall Street, not quite Sesame Street, but kind of right in the middle.
Oh, and thank you for breaking that down, because I honestly thought it was the copywriting with the C in the circle. So then with advertising and media and all of that, what are some things that we need to be mindful when thinking about copywriting in that aspect? Because I had no idea that there was a difference there. So this is definitely educational. And I feel like creative writers, they need to protect their intellectual property if they're going down that path. Because let's be honest, social media is banging right now, and everyone's saying, oh, you got to get on social media, you got to do this, you got to do that. But sometimes people are a little reluctant about doing that because they don't want someone to rip off their work.
Yeah, that's a tricky question because there's so many platforms now for any type of writer to kind of put their work out. I mean, whether it's in a tweet, whether it's in a LinkedIn post, whether it's on Instagram, you could have your own Medium blog. There's just so many routes to go. But I would say if you would want to get into a field like copywriting, and maybe you didn't go to college and you didn't get a 4-year degree in creative writing, or maybe you didn't go to an ad school, so to speak. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't be a copywriter. I didn't know what a copywriter was until I was 31. So it came to me a little bit later in life. But with that being said, I had all that experience of speech writing and stand-up writing. So I had all these other different types of writing. So I had kind of like a good nucleus, I guess you could say. And then it was up to me to figure out how to apply that to copywriting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So you kind of had a foundation, but then as you were going throughout your career, you learn more and you build upon that foundation. And now you're helping other people do the same, right? Would you say I summarized that correctly?
Yeah, yeah, and I think one of the reasons why I'm writing this book right now is because there were certain obstacles and challenges that I went through, the first 3 or 4 years of my career, that were very big eye openers, and they were very tough lessons to learn. So the reason why I'm writing, I'm not a copywriter, but is because I want to give junior copywriters, people who are just coming into the ad world, just a little preview, a little kind of taste of things they can expect, maybe certain career challenges that they might face. So it's kind of the book I wish I would have had when I started out.
Okay. And I'm so glad that you're putting it in the book because you're sharing your knowledge so you could help somebody else get ahead of the curve. So you mentioned challenges, and I want to spend a little time learning and talking about the challenges that you face because sometimes people don't realize that there are a lot of successful people out there, but they went through challenges just like you and I. And we need to talk about that because those challenges were very much the learning curve that helped us perfect and progress our craft. So, what are some of the challenges that you face that you wish that you would have had insight in early on?
Yeah, I think, especially when you're in a creative field, I think just when you get maybe feedback that isn't to your liking, that can be a very tough pill to swallow. Because something like advertising, it can be very subjective. It can, two people can like something and then two other people can think it's not the right message at all. So it took a long time for me to understand that, feedback is just something that happens on a day-to-day basis when you're in the advertising industry. It's not just something that happens once a quarter or once a year during, your performance evaluation. It's something that is constant. And I remember being in meetings, when I first started out, and everyone in the room in these meetings is literally paid to poke holes in your stuff. So, I mean, it's their job to kind of go at it with the red pen. And I didn't realize that to probably 4 or 5 years into my career, that it's their job to make sure that what we're putting out there as a brand makes sense. So that was something that took a while to comprehend, but I know today I'm better off for it.
So, feedback is a gift, is what I like to tell people because whatever applies, you take it and you build upon it. Whatever does not apply, just put it in your back pocket or your safety box for when you need it. But yes, sometimes people can have a hard time stomaching and swallowing that feedback. but just see it as constructive criticism so it can help you really own in on your craft. So for somebody saying, okay, Josh, I heard all this amazing things that you're saying about copywriting, but what do I need to do to protect my intellectual property? Is it right for me to hire a copywriter or can I do it myself? What would you say? And feel free to reframe the question if it makes it easier to answer.
Yeah, I would say, I know earlier you talked about kind of like the self-publishing route. And I'll kind of speak to, you know, new authors like myself who go down that road. Um, I think I have a couple friends, it's funny, who are writing books at the same time. And both of them have gone down the self-publishing route. I'm using a traditional book publisher, but I think there's pros and cons to both. Obviously something like self-publishing is less expensive. And there's a little more to figure out on the back end, um, in terms of, you know, just kind of how to load your document up, how to turn your Google Doc into an actual book. But you do retain a lot of control over the content that you have. For me, Genesis, I get a little impatient. So for me, writing the book was enough. That's why I wanted to just go through a traditional publisher. But there's no right or wrong way to do it, and I would say, for myself, if I write another book, maybe I would self-publish it. It's just a constant learning curve, and as long as I'm learning something, hopefully I'm on the right track.
Absolutely. And I always tell people just evaluate the pros and the cons and do what's best for you. Yes, if you do self publishing, you get to keep more of the money. You have to pay out quite a bit up front versus going through a publishing house. And sometimes with the publishing house, people go that route because they want more exposure. But then there's royalty splits that you have to deal with. There's other monetary things that you have to factor in, like you don't necessarily get all the proceeds from your book sales. They may not necessarily promote your book as much as you promote it, but yet they're getting a nice chunk of the pie. So there's so many things to consider. For my first book, I definitely went through a publishing house. And knowing what I know now and having some other author friends of mine who went self publishing route, I'm starting to see the difference. So I may go self publishing the next go around, but I definitely want to actually do my research and due diligence when it comes to copywriting, finding the right graphic designer for the cover of my book, because I'm very meticulous on how I want certain things to look. And I think that's also important to factor in. So, can we bust some myths here, Josh, between copywriting and creative writing? Because even
Sure.
though they may go hand in hand, there is a big difference. So let's start with the definite the definitions of copywriting and creative writing, because I don't want people to get confused, and I want you to start busting some myths that you've seen in your work field, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, of course. Of
Okay.
course. I would say copywriting is writing for advertising. So for copywriting, you're writing for a specific brand. So think about your Gmail and think about your inbox and all the emails that you get. And think about, my mind always goes to retailers like Banana Republic, Gap, American Eagle, and they'll always have something, in the subject line that says, 50% off holiday sale, don't let these deals pass you by. That work is all done by copywriters. So basically, those retailers will either hire an ad agency to help them write those emails and those communications, or that retailer will have their own in-house agency of copywriters to help craft that message. So like I said in the beginning, copywriting is like creative writing, just with more guardrails. I think creative writing can be almost whatever you want it to be. It can be a short story. It can be a blog post. I wrote blog articles for a very long time, and what I loved about blog articles was, there was no specific right way to do it. It could be 500 words. It could be 2,000 words, and it was something that didn't necessarily have to go through an editor. So you could have an idea, you could write it in the morning, and then you could publish it later on in the afternoon, in a place like, even if it was on Medium or, another platform like that. So I think creative writing is something, you can definitely kind of get out there in the world. But why I like copywriting is it kind of zeroes me in a little bit, if that makes sense. So it gives me something to kind of to focus in on, like my creative energy, if that makes sense.
That definitely makes sense. And I'm gonna start with creative writing and work backwards. So with creative writing, it makes me think about high school, like writing without a prompt, releasing your inner creativity, and just writing with your heart, being a heart center and putting out content there. So there's no structure, there's no rhyme or reason, and you're writing it from a place where you're like, okay, I want to make an imprint, but then I also want this imprint to drive an impact. And you're having fun doing it because there's no strings attached. It's not stringent. You're just having fun with it. And that's what makes it creative writing, because it's your creativity and you're writing as a way of therapy. Or some people say, oh, writing is therapeutic. Writing is a way to liberate and free myself. And then copywriting is like making sure you dot all the I's and cross all the T's, making sure it's compliant, following the rules, and etc. So it's very the stringent process of it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's copywriting, especially, if you're doing it for, a big name brand or a retailer, there's a lot of eyeballs that have to see it before, it actually kind of goes out into the world. But like you were saying, it was funny. I like how you said, like, you think back to high school, and kind of those creative writing prompts. Because, I mean, if I could go back, like, one of the things that I wish I would have done earlier, and I guess I could still do it, but I wish I would have done earlier was, write like the idea for like a movie or like a screenplay, because I always thought that would be a cool idea. And I read a book a while ago by Brian Grazer. He's a movie producer, and one of the pieces of advice that he got was, if you can write a movie or a screenplay, that's an idea that you own. That's an idea that you can bring to people. So if there's any advice for aspiring writers out there is, if you can write, something for TV or, something for movies, I think that's a great way to go. It's going to be hard, but I think it could be very rewarding at the same token.
That would be super cool, because then just to see what you wrote turn into like a movie, a play, or something, and you're like, oh, wow, like I had no idea. And kind of like books, like authors, a lot of times, like after some years go by, you'll find out that there are different production companies that will pitch authors to turn their books into movies. And
Yep.
I think that's pretty cool. But then that's also another thing you have to be mindful of, because there's some copywriting aspects that go into that. Because whenever you're converting from a book to a movie, there may be some aspects that they want to change. And based on how you have your book, do you want it to be exactly the same? Or are you okay with the changes? Because those changes could also affect the story.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And yeah, that's, the story that I always go back to is, there's kind of the old Hollywood myth that Sylvester Stallone wrote the Rocky movie in 3 days. So he watched a fight with Muhammad Ali and Chuck Wepner, that ironically took place in Ohio, where I live. And he was just so inspired by it that he wrote the screenplay to Rocky in 3 days. And, the rest is kind of history. So I know it doesn't happen like that for everybody. But I will say, if inspiration strikes you, don't let it leave. Like, even if you just do voice to text in your phone, or you send yourself a text message, try not to let that idea go in one ear and out the other. Try to capture it, so that way you can come back to it and say, okay, is there anything here that I can, expand upon?
That's a really good tip. And I'm just going to share a little bit of my story. When I wrote my first book, I wrote the entire thing on my cell phone. I did not have a laptop outside of my company's laptop. I was
Yep.
working in oil and gas at the time, and I did not want to put my intellectual property on their system. And it was so funny whenever I went to get ready to submit it to the publishing house. She's like, I know you don't think that you're going to try to submit it via this notes app. And I was like, well, I don't have like a laptop or anything that I can use. So it was really funny. My husband actually went out and bought me a laptop, and I was just set on a Mac because I was just so tired of having PCs that would give you the blue screen. So I was like, I need
Yep.
something that's lasting. And then I transferred everything over. So I tell people where there's a will, there is a way. And there's so many ways to put your literary work out there, whether you're using Josh's method where you're speaking to text or writing it down in an old school journal or using a computer or your cell phone, because our cell phones are like a powerful computer these days. So I definitely wanted to share that.
Definitely.
Anything you want to add, Josh?
No, I think that's great. I mean, I think that's for you, I mean, writing that whole thing, pretty much in your phone, I would say, it was good of you to at least capture all of that, and then when you got to the point where you needed a laptop, you figured out a way, to get a laptop. But the fact that you just kind of kept at it, kind of texting, on your phone, I mean, that's like you said, it's a super computer in our back pocket. So, use it for all it's worth.
Absolutely. And now let's jump into the call to action part of the segment. So, Josh, what is your call to action for our audience once they hear the chat about copywriting and creative writing?
Yeah, sure. I would say, I mean, feel free, I would say feel free to reach out to me if any of your listeners, Genesis, have, questions on creative writing or copywriting. They can always, hit me on Twitter. It's just at Joshua Womack 82. It's the same thing on Instagram. And yeah, like I said, this book that I'm writing should be out probably late May, early June. Again, it's called I'm Not a Copywriter, but Lessons Learned from a Late Bloomer, and that'll be available on Amazon. So be on the lookout for that. But even if you don't want to buy the book, and I don't blame you if you don't, even if you just want to chat, be happy to talk about writing or anything else.
And Josh, do you have a website to complement your Twitter and your Instagram?
Yeah, it's just my name, joshwomack.net.
Amazing. And Womack, y'all, is spelled W as woman, O as in open, M as in Mary, A as in apple, C as in Charlie, and K as in kangaroo. So Womack. And thank you so much, Josh, for coming on here and sharing your expertise and knowledge with the copywriting space in ads, ad and marketing, and then really telling us about creative writing. All of your contact information will be in the show notes. Audience, I will definitely challenge you to share this segment with someone else or go learn something new about copywriting that you didn't know before, because knowledge is power. And if you're learning, you will keep growing. But if you're not learning, you're just wasting time. So make sure you subscribe and share this segment. We're on 40 plus platforms. You can see the video component at YouTube by typing in at Gems with Genesis Amaris Kemp. All videos are there. And lastly, but not least, I want to thank each one of you for tuning in on a regular basis to support the mission of Gems, which is to bring educational topics, inspiration, and motivation while we bridge the gap for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And because of you, we are now ranked in the top 3% globally out of 2.8 million podcasts for www.listennotes.com. So until next time, peace, love, and lots of blessings. Have yourself an amazing one.